Whistle a blow, and now I know that we're going. We've just started. Yes, we've departed. Why, we're leaving the pier. I say we're steaming from New York Bay. That's why I feel so gay. If we get there on time, I'll be mighty happy. If we're not there on time, why, I'll feel mighty bad, 'cause we'll sure have some time. Way down in Louisiana, here's what makes them all feel glad.
When we think of monstrous legends that define a town or territory, we may think of the Mothman, the Chupacabra, or the Grunch, all works of fantasy. But what about the real monsters that take hold of a city? What about people so evil and wicked in their deeds, they evolved into larger-than-life monsters that people don't dare to speak about in over a whisper? These monsters are often recognized in their various portrayals in pop culture. In London's case, they have the infamous Jack the Ripper, whose crimes were so barbaric that even still people believe he could have been something more than human or possessed by evil himself. In Wisconsin, there is the notorious Ed Gein, who inspired the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Silence of the Lambs, and Psycho due to the cartoonishly evil nature of his carnage. It should come as no surprise that New Orleans has a few things, and people, that are known to go bump in the night. It wasn't until American Horror Story did their second season in New Orleans that her name became more widely known outside of New Orleans, Madame LaLaurie. Now, for over a century, Madame LaLaurie was one of these infamous characters that locals knew by heart, a socialite, a woman of great wealth, and a murderess. In a city with a history of piracy and organized crime, someone moonlighting as a murderer wouldn't be anything to raise an eyebrow at. However, it was the nature in which she killed, the brutality in which she operated, and the hate that she spread that made this socialite reach levels of notoriety that gave her the title that will live on for generations: Monster. Today, we will be discussing the myth and the legend of that hateful murderess, Madame LaLaurie. A whole bunch of brownstones, so I'm guessing the prices are going to get jacked up pretty soon. Yeah, it's going up.
Yes.
All right, let me know. They're going to do the Wayne's World countdown where they don't say the 2 and the 1. All right, so today at Crescent Crime, can you guys introduce yourselves and what tour company you work for?
Go ahead, Jane.
I am Jane Delacour. I am a historian, writer, tour guide, and I have a degree in Middle Ages military history because I wanted to be unemployed.
How was that waitress career?
Haircutting career worked out well.
And I'm Jeffrey. I'm Jane's husband and business partner. I'm a historian. I like the unusual and the weird stuff, true crime, and sort of weird, strange true tours in New Orleans. And we've been doing this for 12 years, and we just love what we do.
Awesome. Well, how did you guys get started in Strange True Tours?
Actually, it was me. I started working as a ghost tour guide, and then I was taught a script. Go to this corner, do the same story that every other guide does, and Jane, having a history degree and being from Louisiana, her family goes way back, she read the script and goes, you know, this is all BS, right?
Yep.
And then we came across a couple of books, an author historian that was Buddy Stalls, and then I came across a book called Mr. New Orleans. And then we go, why isn't anybody doing this stuff? The real history, the vice, the crime, the mafia, burlesque, all of that. And we created our Strange True Tours.
Awesome. Yes. And where can people look for it? What's the name of your website?
You can find us at strangetruetours.com. We're on Facebook and Instagram and soon on the TikTok.
Well, you had mentioned, Jeffrey, that you were doing ghost tours before, and
Yes.
There is one woman who is shrouded in mystery. There's been a paranormal spin on her. There's been all kinds of spins, and we can see some of the books ahead of us. Yes. Madame LaLaurie. Can you guys tell us a little bit about the story of Madame LaLaurie?
Oh, gosh, where do you start?
She was a real woman. She did exist. And that, we know that we've got birth records, marital records. So, I mean, she was a real woman. Her story is very complicated. It's not a cop out, but she definitely was one of those, a product of her time. She had a very unusual upbringing, and that really does kind of cycle into the rest of her life. Yeah. She was the Kim Kardashian of her day.
I had heard that particularly the men in her family were kind of abusive, that there was a lot of alcoholism in her family, and that she wasn't actually French. She started out as not only Irish, but lace curtain Irish in Uptown. Is there truth to any of that?
Yes, she was predominantly Irish, the McCarty family. But that beginning where you say abusiveness, because what was she, 14, 15 years old when she was?
She was 13.
13. And how old was her first husband?
40s.
Oof.
Yeah, think about that for a minute.
Even for that time period, that would have been
It would have been very unusual.
Yeah.
Here, at least in New Orleans, they didn't start trotting their daughters out until about 15. Yeah. But Delphine, as a child, was very precocious. And there's letters written about her as a child. Now, as a historian, this is very unusual. The only time children are worthy of the ink of a newsletter is when they're dead, sick, or there's something really big happening with that child. And there's lots of letters talking about her precociousness, how willful she is, how spoiled she is, and how beautiful she is. So I think that also kind of sets up her future mental state.
So were essentially her parents worried that, that she would be dishonored, and so they married her off young to sort of dispel any rumors?
He was also a Spanish government official, too.
He was a Spanish government official, and they were at a social event. And something, we're not even sure what happened, but something happened at the social event that caused a scandal.
Oh, dear.
Yes.
Oh.
Ah, yes.
Older gentleman, young, beautiful girl.
He was very willful.
Yeah, maybe not like the most attentive parents keeping an eye on her or anything.
Well, you didn't raise your own children, especially if you were middle class and above. You would have nannies, tutors, and then either a spinster aunt or some type of chaperone. Yeah. And...
But you're surrounded by the enslaved people because they're doing all the work, and again,
right.
The raising of the children and such. So you've got a strange world that she's growing up in. The wealth and everything, the
privilege,
social area that she's in. And then you have other factors. Her uncle was actually killed by a little slave revolt on his plantation. What was that, 1777?
1777, correct.
So she wasn't even born yet, but this was a story that's prominent in the family and in the family psyche.
Yeah, this event got baked into the family trauma.
I see. And I had heard that, along with being very willful, she had one heck of a temper.
Yes, there was a lot of...
Spoiled little rich girl?
Yeah.
No, that never happens. No.
Right, I'm shocked.
And then you're married off to a Spanish government official, a man who has power and prestige.
And he was a nobleman. He was a Spanish nobleman.
Yeah.
I see. And then this could just be rumor as well, but I had also heard that essentially her father had a mistress who was an enslaved person. And part of her resentment may have been like, she's taking daddy away from me. And that was kind of her sense of entitlement.
In that day and age, what plantation owner didn't have a mixed race mistress?
True.
Yeah, I mean, that was normal. Mm-hmm. So she would not have even thought about that. Yeah. If she had any feelings about it, she probably would have been like, this is taken away from my mother. Yeah. But...
So she had a reputation for being spoiled. She had a reputation for having a bad temper, for being beautiful. There was a scandal that happened, and then she's married to a Spanish nobleman. I mean, these are all like really fascinating building blocks to build up to who she would later become as an adult woman. So once she is married to the Spanish nobleman, what goes on from there?
Oh, she shipped off to Spain. He was called back to Spain.
And at that time, they married without permission of the Spanish crown, which was a big no-no. Even though he was a low-level nobleman, the king micromanaged these things. So they were forced to go into exile until he was able to beg for forgiveness.
Interesting. And was she in exile in the Caribbean, from my understanding?
She got stuck in Cuba. That was a stopping point in between there and back. And on the way back, somewhere on that route, her husband passed away. So by the time she got back to New Orleans, 5, 6 years after her marriage to him, she's a widow.
With a child.
Yeah.
With a baby.
And a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money.
A lot of money. And a title.
Yeah. So who does she marry off? A man named Jean Blanc. Do you know that name?
That does sound... Is he the surgeon?
Well, before we get to that part, when she came back to New Orleans, she caused another scandal. She's brand new widow with a baby. And that time frame, she is supposed to wear black from head to toe. She should not even leave her house for 1 year. But she doesn't wear black. She's going to dinner parties, she's going to events, and she's going to the theater and to the opera. And this caused a massive scandal. And she's like, I'm rich. I'm 18 years old.
I don't care.
I don't give a crap.
What do you expect an 18-year-old girl to do?
You know, so willful, beautiful, even more rich. I mean, she came from a very well-off family, and now she's got a dead husband wealth and title. And, you know, she hands the baby off to the nanny and goes about her life. And it's at one of these parties that she meets the extraordinary Jean Blanc.
Jean Blanc. So
He was a businessman. He did work in politics and everything else in the city. He was in the shipping industry, and he was a cohort and business partner with one Pierre and Jean Lafitte, the New Orleans pirates.
I see. Okay, because I was going to say that name does sound vaguely familiar.
And not only was Jean Blanc running with pirates, he was a lawyer. He was political animal. So he is walking this fine line between, you know, not a fake pirate. He's going out on the ships and, you know.
Wait a minute. Was he a modern day Roger Stone?
And so, you know, he's able to go to, you know, these well-to-do houses, offering them French laces that they couldn't get anywhere else. And so, you know, and he was sent here by Napoleon to help negotiate the treaty between Spain and France in handing the colony over. So he is very well connected, and he's committing piracy.
Yeah. Well, he was actually the man that set up the secret meeting between John Lafitte and General Andrew Jackson right before the Battle of New Orleans.
So this was like the guy to know if you wanted something done.
Oh, yes, yes. He was the man to know, and here's Delphine like,
And how many children did they have together?
4 children in 5, 6 years.
Yeah.
So she really liked him.
Part-time pirate.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah.
She loved her bad boys.
Yeah, I can see it.
We don't believe in her first marriage that she was married off at 13, that they didn't consummate the marriage until she was about 16, because she didn't get pregnant until 17, didn't give birth until 18. So we think either she was given that nicety or she didn't get her full womanness until she was 15. So we're not sure about those 2 years there because they were in exile.
And she would have, even for that time period, been pretty young. So even he might have been kind of weirded out. Like,
I'll give you a couple of years.
Yeah.
This is a young girl.
I mean, she was 13.
No matter what day and age.
Yeah.
I mean, she is a child.
Yeah, that would
Spoiled,
have been. But a child. Yeah, that would have been weird even for somebody back then. Like, oh.
So one child by the first husband. Then she marries the part-time pirate bad boy and has 4 kids. And then he disappeared. We actually don't know what happened to Jean Blanc because he would take off for a month or 2 at a time, pirating operations in the swamps with the Lafitte brothers and such. And just...
never came back.
Yeah.
So is your theory that he may have disappeared at sea, that he may have been murdered, or that he may have abandoned her?
probably got murdered at sea.
I'm going to say he went down with the ship.
Yeah.
That's-
I mean, they had 4 kids in 5-6 years. He loved her. They were passionate.
He was at
about
least
each other.
banging her.
Yeah, yeah, we
Can we
know
say
that.
Can we say that? Sorry.
Oh, I'm
Oh no,
sorry.
we can. Yeah, you're
Okay.
good. You're good.
Yeah, but it's just human nature, and that's part of these stories that most people don't really look into. What made the person what they are, what made them do what they did, what led them to that moment in time in history, and then we get to the third husband.
Well, before we get to him, because Jean Blanc disappeared at probably that perfect time, because the city was starting to go away from the pirates are cool, we like our pirates, to like, ooh, yeah, we don't need this. And so piracy was now starting to be slightly frowned upon. And so now you have a young widow, 5 children, sitting on millions of dollars of ill-gotten goods. And even though she is from the McCarty family, has the big name and everything behind her, she still needs to kind of whitewash this money and goods. But she, again, is going to keep partying because for her, the party doesn't stop. And even though she may have loved Jean Blanc, she didn't mourn him for very long, because she was right back out on the party scene very soon after a well amount of time when it's like he should have been back.
Well, and she's young and beautiful and rich, and so
Right.
she's going to be like, why should the party stop?
Exactly.
Their house on Royal Street is, I mean, it's still there, and it's beautiful. And that's when she starts writing letters to this young French doctor that just rolled into town. One of the daughters she had with Jean Blanc had some kind of spinal deformity. We're not sure what it was. I mean, we just don't know. And so Dr. LaLaurie rolls into town, having to gone to dental school in France. He comes to New Orleans and puts ads in the newspaper that he has the cure for humpbacks.
Okay, that he definitely learned in dental school. That's the first thing they
I can
cover is
just see,
humpbacks.
You could just change your medical degree at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, you really could. You could just roll into town, throw a shingle up, and say, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, and people are like, oh, okay.
Yeah, we trust you.
But here's the thing, Dr. Louis LaLaurie was a much younger man. He was only
Much.
2 years older than her oldest daughter.
Awkward.
We had cougars back then too.
Yep, yep.
Okay?
Wow.
No judgment, no judgment. And that's when the rumors really started about the abuse and the torture of her enslaved people. And that's where things start to get a little muddy and cloudy. You know, you have the social elite that, of course, you have your little whispers and hush-hush, but you're not going to talk too much because you want to be invited to her parties and her social events. But you have the lower class, the streets people, who they're going to take a juicy story and run with it.
Especially about the rich people. Because
Yeah.
even to this day, who do we follow the every step of?
The
Celebrities and
yeah.
manufactured celebrities. And so we're humans. I mean, we have not changed.
Nor will we.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing that always caught my interest is like the story that, from what I've heard, that launched this rumor that she was sort of a torturer and a mastermind, criminal mastermind, was that she got so furious with one of her slaves who accidentally tugged her hair as she was brushing it that she grabbed the brush and smacked the girl just right so hard that she started bleeding.
Okay.
And this is the same story from Anne Bath-Roy, that allegedly Anne Bath-Roy, when she, same thing, flew into a fit of rage, smacked the girl. So I thought that was an interesting detail, that there seems to be, from the rumor mill, the same overlap of her villain origin story as there is
with
with
the same
Anne
story,
Bath-Roy.
the girl fell off of the balcony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have, I don't think there's any documentation or eyewitness accounts of that happening. It's one of those stories that has just grown and grown. Every time the story got rewritten, it's a little grander and a little creepier. And in fact, all the mutilations and tortures that we now know of the local ghost tours, those didn't come about until, what, the 1960s or 70s?
1970s with one particular author.
Who was the Anne Rice?
No. Victor Klein.
Victor Klein.
Yeah, well, that book actually came out in 96.
Oh, okay.
With the story. It was Jean Delavine a little bit
Well,
before that.
Jean
but those stories were
Delavine,
not.
in her stories, she doesn't go into any real detail about the event. Jean Delavine was a local historian. We kind of use that a little loosely. And she wrote a lot of, especially during that time, it was... they were paying writers to write local histories, and she wrote the Ghost Stories of New Orleans, and she is in there, page 248.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see when it was written. I don't have my glasses because I'm an old man.
I can take a look.
Thank you.
All right, let's see. Ghost Stories of New Orleans. From the exterior, it has a very 60s look to it. Let's take a look. Third printing 2018, but copyright 1946. Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, she was one of we've got other stories, but she was the first one to really put it out there, and it's buried in there. It's not even the lead story. It's not even the most exciting story in the book.
Yeah.
It's just about this, rich woman who tortured her slaves, and then the story kind of like goes into a lull again, and then it comes roaring back in the 1970s.
Was this because in the 70s there was kind of a resurgence and an interest in the occult and the bizarre and all that? And so that...
2 words. Anne Rice.
Okay.
Interview with a Vampire. We did not have a single vampire story, legend, or lore in the city of New Orleans until she wrote that book.
And now you have all of them.
No, we have all this.
And the other thing is, too, that Bram Stoker was in New Orleans for 10 days in the last week of January, first couple of days of February in 1916. He was in the middle of writing Dracula at that time, and he was here on Bourbon Street at the Opera House with the Lyceum Theater Production Company doing Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. There is no mention whatsoever of New Orleans or the South in any of Bram Stoker's writings or vampire, and created $1 million industry for us. We did not have walking garden district tours like they are today, or the ghost tours, until that book came out in 76.
Yep, they filmed Interview with the Vampire, the TV show, on my street, and I was so sad when I heard about that after the fact, because apparently if you live there, the production company pays you.
You didn't get paid?
No, because I moved in after they did the...
You gotta talk, okay?
I know, I was like, come on. Should have been here earlier.
Yeah, we made $200 off of Your Honor just for 15 minutes of inconvenience.
What?
It was a little more than 15 minutes, but still.
Yeah.
I gotta be more in the know on these things.
Yeah. But that just created this interest, and that's the 1970s into the 80s is when the whole goth world took off. You've got bands like Bauhaus and things like that coming out, and Anne Rice's story. And
Marionita Toops was in her heyday.
This is true as well, but that's a very
different
reference. That's the Witch Queen. We'll talk about her later.
She was like, but that was when like the occult and things like that were really starting to catch on here, where it's when you would start really seeing the palm readers out, because they were around, but they were not as popular as they were until late 70s. As a little kid, I do not remember seeing the sheer amount of palm readers and tarot card readers, especially in the square. As a kid, we just didn't see them.
Yeah.
And yet the city itself truly has the ambiance to accommodate for that sort of thing. I mean, it truly, the architecture alone really gives the city a mystical element.
This city has always had this occult, paranormal vibe going back to the beginning. Mm-hmm. Not only did the French peasants bring their root working, we'll call it witchcraft for lack of a better term for it. Then you have the Africans and the enslaved coming here with
the voodoo element,
with that voodoo element, and so we have always kind of had this third rail down here, besides
dark Caribbean, occultish.
Yeah,
what happens in the swamps. It's mysterious, and you're coming from a big city. This is just mind-boggling. And have you seen the French Quarter full of fog?
Yes, that's a whole
Yeah.
other thing.
Yeah, I
That's
mean-
yeah. I took video of that, and my friends like barely believed it. They
You
were like,
don't
"This
need a
seems-
ghost story. You're
Yeah.
just in the element already.
You're in the ghost story."
You
Yes.
are the ghost story sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's
And I think
just...
you literally live on a movie set.
Yeah, truly, truly. What is that old phrase that there's something in the water of New Orleans that'll always compel you to come back?
Yep.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe
So
it.
here you have this story of this woman and these tortured, enslaved people, and it just every couple of decades a new author rolls into town. It was author named Martineau who first did the story in like the 1830s, 1840s. Then it was written again by George Washington Cable, 1888, right there, late 1880s. And then Jean Delavine, and then Victor Klein.
Grace King in the 1920s with the writer work program. I mean, she put stuff out. And
But she put more of a positive spin on the LaLaurie family.
she put a positive spin on the LaLaurie family because she knew them.
Socially connected to the descendants of the LaLaurie family.
I'm surprised. Well, I guess we'll get to that as we follow her story, because there are different rumors on where Madame LaLaurie ended up, but I guess
I know.
to continue with her story. So she is now married to Dr. LaLaurie, being the
Yes.
fabulous cougar that she is.
Well,
but
before
her
they got
husband-
before they got married, she has a child out of wedlock by him.
Oops.
So think about this. This was at a time where you didn't even kiss in public. And she got knocked up, and they didn't even get married when she got pregnant. They didn't get married till almost 2 years afterwards.
What?
And as a historian, if things don't make sense or they don't follow a typical pattern, we ask the question, why?
Sure.
Why did this anomaly happen? We have no records on what was going on at that time, because between the church, her family, the socialness, she was just like, nah, I'm just going to do my own thing. Because when they did get married, on their marriage certificate at the very bottom, Dr. Laurie Louis, he writes down that the child is his. And that makes the child legitimate.
Interesting.
So she had a bastard.
What was the hesitation to marrying her? Because even in the 20th century, if you got someone pregnant, I mean, the next step, it wasn't even a question. It was, oh, you're going to marry this person now.
Yeah, we have no idea why maybe he did offer and she was like, no. I mean, we have no idea why it took them 2 years to get married.
He did not have any wealth or anything like that.
I mean, he had
either.
nothing.
So
I mean, he came here
he was
with...
in control.
Maybe that's why she said no, because even by today's standards, a lot of celebrities will, have DUIs and will break the law, but they don't go to jail because they're millionaires. And they're like, well, come on. the law does
And
not
that's
apply
what
to me.
happened to her. Because at that point, stories were coming out about her abusing her enslaved people.
And this is also the time financially when women here, especially in Louisiana, were losing their rights to manage their own money. Under French and Spanish rule, a woman could manage her own money. She could inherit. She could distribute wealth. She could sue in court. When we became, after Louisiana Purchase and we became American, all of those were taken away. And we didn't start getting these rights back until the 1920s. I mean, if a woman got divorced up until 1920, she automatically lost her children. Which this will come up with another story.
But let's get to the good stuff.
But so it's very interesting to see that there was this illegitimate child running around and no one even made mention of it.
And she's got 6 kids now.
6 children.
6 kids. She
3
does,
different men.
With 3 different men. She eventually does marry Dr. LaLaurie. So you had mentioned that there were rumors already going on. I thought the rumors of her being abusive started after she married Dr. LaLaurie.
Well, after she married the doctor,
after
that's
she
when they
married
all
the doctor.
started up. And she'd actually been taken to court a couple of times for abusing some of her enslaved folks.
Because the French did give enslaved people some, not very many, obviously, but some legal rights, including
the
like
Code
torture was
Noir.
a big no-no. Yeah.
So
So
this
she
was a
was
big no-no legally, socially. You just didn't do this.
religiously, people were
Yeah.
very, yeah.
So the stories and rumors were there. She'd been taken to court, fined, a little slap on the wrist because you're wealthy. And then everything led up to that one night.
How far did the abuse go? How abusive was she?
Um, that is the gray area because when they discovered the fire, they discovered a total of 7 enslaved people that were abused in chains. One woman with a big heavy iron collar, and they were taken away and they were put in the Cabildo in the jail there at the Cabildo in Jackson Square, and they were on display to the general public. You could just walk down to the square next to the church and see her folks. Yeah.
Man, so I mean, it's enslaved people certainly were not treated well in the 19th century. So for her to be publicly ridiculed by how she was treating enslaved people, that truly says something.
And what makes taking the enslaved to the Cabildo, well, technically the Presbytere, and put on display was that the hospital was half a block from her house. She lived on what's now Governor Nichols, was then Hospital Street. The hospital was half a block down, and they did not take them there.
Oh.
And we don't have any proof of this. It is the general consensus was because at this time, there was a big showdown between the newly arrived Americans and the entrenched locals. Mm-hmm. And this was believed as a way of helping to stroke up fire and anger against the local power, makers, so that the new Americans can come in and start breaking up this cabal that was already here.
I see. So they were kind of displaying like, hey, if you side with the Americans, like this is what we don't tolerate lawbreakers and all that. Okay, so that was kind of to
And
gain
just
favor of the
socially,
public.
the Americans did not care for the French and the Spanish, and vice versa, as well as that.
Shocking,
So
no one there got along.
Yeah.
it was believed to be yellow journalism when it says they found a half a dozen slaves in the conditions, the atrocities, the likes of which we cannot describe here. The imagination's going to run wild. That's how the rumors start. Well, we just know that we can't even talk about how bad it is. Well, how bad was it? What did she do?
And then, oh my gosh, we can go down to the Presbytere and check it out. And so it was a way of, yes, terrible things happened. And then they've got, the way they were handled was done in such a way that it was partially politicized. And also, throughout the whole event, there's only one name on everyone's lips.
Madame LaLaurie.
Madame LaLaurie, and not her husband.
So walk me through the night of the fire. What happened when the fire raged in that mansion, and what first drew the public's attention to
The
the
legend
madwoman?
or the what really happened?
Give me a brief synopsis of the legend, and then tell me what really happened.
The legend, and if you actually go to that corner on any given night, which you hear all the time, and there's 8 different tour guides, you'll hear 8 different versions of what happened. The basic legend is she's having one of her big grand parties. She's got a band playing and cocktails and hors d'oeuvres are being served on silver platters and whatnot when the fire broke out in the slave quarter residence. And then when the fire brigade shows up, they found an elderly woman who is in chains who set the fire and says, I've set this fire because I would rather die than spend another night in this house knowing what they're doing to us. And she's pointing up. And then they search the house, and that's when they find the attic, the sealed attic, and enter the attic, and that's when all the gruesomeness stories grow. We do know that they found some enslaved people in that attic. They were in chains, they were malnourished, and had been abused and in bad condition and taken away. The legend says that the party was still out on the sidewalks, watching all these tortured people being brought out of the house and getting into an uproar and wanting to tear the house apart. The legend continues the next day. A carriage pulls up and she makes her escape, and the crowd goes nuts, and they basically attack the house and destroy the house. That's not exactly true either. Everybody did go into an uproar. They were pissed off, naturally. She left the house the next morning and spent 2 weeks on the McCarty plantation, which is down in the Marigny area. And that's when she actually left and went to Paris, France. She did not believe what happened was really that bad of an issue, but her children and everyone else, like, you got to go. You got to go. She tried to come back to New Orleans as an adult while she was still alive. And even her children said, just please.
Yeah, just go back.
The best book to really learn the real truth is Carolyn Moore Long. And that's this book right here. That is the definitive Bible of documentation of what really happened. So the legend of her making her escape and the driver whipping and everything like that, it was, it grows. You know, the very next day, the story is growing and growing. We know the house was destroyed. The three-story house that you see now, that was rebuilt, about 6 years later?
About 6 years later.
Yeah.
It was a open lot for a little bit, and then they built the house that's there, but only the first 2 stories. The third story was added later on.
I see. Yeah, the story I had heard was that, there was a carnival of torture where one slave had his arms and legs broken and reshaped to walk like a crab.
Yeah,
Another
the crab
person
lady.
had feces put in their mouth and sewn shut.
Caterpillar, sex change operation. I've heard so many.
Yeah.
And it gets really disturbing after a while because it gets to the point where the tortures are so fantastical that, one, no human being could withstand that.
Yeah.
But then it comes to a point where you're like, you're fetishizing abuse on enslaved Black bodies. And that's very uncomfortable.
Very, very uncomfortable.
But it's $1 million business.
Yeah.
Yep.
So at least when I talk about Madame LaLaurie, I talk about, the times that she lived in, how that affected her. But I really do bring in the abused victims because at the end of the day, she did not treat her enslaved people well.
Even by 19th century standards,
So
which
even
is
by
shocking.
those standards, so she had always had these rumors that her enslaved servants were very, very well trained, very, very scared, and very, very thin. And this was a time when how well nourished your enslaved person was a way of showing off your wealth.
So you can see she was not only very abusive, but very neglectful about the safety and well-being about people who were making her life easier.
Right.
Just had no empathy, no care.
Yeah.
Like
Just
no compassion.
Yeah.
It was all about her.
Was she a sociopath? Tendencies. There are allegations of mental illness during her lifetime, which would fit right into it.
It would certainly explain a lot of her behavior.
I mean, she has a lot of narcissistic tendencies about her because she did not care, even with her own children. She didn't care. Like her oldest son, Jean Blanc II, he was, marrying into a very well-off family here, and he was like, don't you dare come in here and ruin this for us.
I had heard...
All of her daughters made very good matches.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as the children go, they did not have too much of the sins of the mother on them. And, especially the LeBlanc children. I mean, they all completely just disassociate themselves from their mother.
I had heard that she was not a very good mother, and it's funny because even though American Horror Story does not get a lot of the information right, it's all very sensationalized and fantasy, they do portray her as a bad mother as well.
Right.
So that seems to be one of the things they did get right.
And you have to imagine, even at that time, very few upper-class women they would manage their children like stock options. This child's going to have to marry into this family. This child's going to go to this school so we can get him into this and this. I mean, they would plan out their children's future.
That's still done in this city.
Which is still done in this city. But as far as like the love and the care, I mean, it was not there. And one of the things that if you read letters, diaries, journals, and things from that time, one of the big takeaways is that especially men who are coming here from like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and they're meeting these beautiful, well-cultured women who can talk with a man about politics and war and just be very educated, be well dressed, know, all these, manners and niceties. But they said that their cruelty held no bounds. The only thing bigger than their beauty was their cruelty.
Interesting.
And that
was a social norm.
One, it was a social norm. And then again, these women are in a culture where they're not respected. Mm-hmm. They're only good for making more babies. And they have all this pressure and socialness, on them to like have a 13-inch waist, be pleasant at all. I mean, I got all this on them. And then, they have no outlet. And the only outlet they have is to take their abuse and to put it onto somebody else. Yeah. And that's really what happened, because at that time, women ruled their homes. I mean, we all say, yes, the man was technically in charge, but once that man walked through his door, he usually had very little say on what happened in his house. It would be the wife who would make the arrangements for the children. It would be the wife who does all of the, social calendar. I mean, the wife would
management.
And
it's management.
It was.
Yeah.
And for the Frenchmen, for the 1700s and up until the Americans got here, French men did not get educated, middle class and above, did not get as educated as the women did. Because we knew here the women would be the ones running the businesses, running the homes, and doing all the, running plantations. And so...
all the tedious work. We ain't got time for that.
Yeah, while the men are out smoking cigars, pirating, and
horse racing,
and having mistresses and visiting the enslaved quarters. I mean, that was what men did. Life is what the women had to take care of, and so they lashed out at the only people that they could. And that would have been, their children and the enslaved. So there would have been there was just abuse everywhere.
Hurt people. I
mean, it's just what it comes down to.
So with Madame LaLaurie, the scandal erupts. People are saying, understandably, she is a horrible person. She has been very abusive to people who are already being abused. And from then on, she escapes to Paris. And again, I had heard the rumor that her children had escaped, or her daughter specifically had escaped to Paris with her. But from what I'm hearing, that is not the truth. Her kids, all of them, stayed in the U.S.
Well, except for the illegitimate little one.
Yeah, I think one daughter did go with her, I believe. I'd have to double check.
Yeah, because the youngest child disappears.
You have so many stories written down, and all of them are completely different.
The youngest one disappears off of the record when they're in New York heading to Paris. We don't know what happens to him. He doesn't go to Paris with her. We don't know if he changed his name, got an apprenticeship, passed away. No idea. Just disappears.
And the rumors of Madame LaLaurie, when did those truly start to spiral? Is that when the books were written, and that's when we started?
The rumors started almost immediately. This was a horrific event. Even in today's day and age, it would still be a horrific event for New Orleans and the French Quarter.
People are people. You're going to run into someone at the market and be like, "Oh, did you hear?" And then it just goes. And then New Orleans has always been a tourist state. And people are going to go to the French Quarter, and they're going to see these beautiful buildings, and then a half-demolished house. Like, what the heck happened here? Oh, man, guess what happened here?
You got George Washington Cable here in the 1880s writing a number of stories about New Orleans. And he's going to sit down and, do you know about this? You sit down and buy somebody a beer at a bar. Just imagine the stories you're going to get.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Crazy stuff.
So it started off just, I think, about 4 or 5 years after the incident. It was an author from England who came through New Orleans and wrote a story about it. That was 1840s.
Yeah, 1840.
I think that was Martineau. And then it was George Washington Cable who wrote his story in 1888, and it got more salacious. Then Jean Delavine's, and then it was really in that 1970s. Anne Rice just came out. The Victor Klein book was written, 76?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did Interview with the Vampire come out?
74?
76.
76?
Oh, wow.
Oops.
It was written in 74. It took her 2
that's
years
right,
to get
2
it
years to
published.
get it published.
Got
Yeah.
it. One thing I'm curious about is, especially with the story of the enslaved people being surgically altered, Madame LaLaurie got all the credit, but her husband was the one who was a doctor. Why wasn't the husband ever included in any stories of abuse? Because if you're married to someone who's abusive, chances are you may be complicit in that.
That's a speculation factor there.
The speculation is because Dr. LaLaurie was from France, there was nothing to be made by making him out to be the bad guy.
Oh, I see.
There was no gain.
Yeah.
I see.
And he was young, he's new in town, nobody knows much about him, but here's Delphine that they've known her entire life. They know her stories. They have reasons to hate her because they've heard the stories of her abusing her enslaved people already.
And she is scandal behind her
They got
already.
a divorce.
They did, didn't they?
They divorced.
Okay, that's right.
So that would have been another scandal right there that no one talks about.
He took off, and they believed he ended up in Cuba. We're not sure where he ended up, but he left New Orleans, and she went to France.
Good Lord. Well, I mean, there's certainly a lot to learn about the LaLaurie story and the LaLaurie mansion. And if anyone wants to see it, it is at the corner of Governor Nichols and Royal Street. And can you guys please tell the audience again what the name of your tours is so that way they can come see the real story?
It is Strange True Tours.
Strange True Tours.
And we actually only do private tours. The legal limit for a tour group in the French Quarter is 28 people to a single tour guide. You've seen that outside your balcony, haven't you?
Yep.
It's a nightmare, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So if it's 2 people or on up, it's only going to be a private experience. So that way it's just your group. You don't have to worry about some drunk tourist from Wisconsin ruining everything, or anything like that. It's just a much better way to enjoy it and enjoy your time in New Orleans. But we do every subject you can imagine. We are proper historians. This is just one of many things.
I find Delphine a fascinating study in psychology. And I didn't mean to go into like women's studies, but it kind of happens because the more into the stories you get, and you're like, well, why is it this way for her and not over here? And then because she gave the Americans a way of taking her out, her power and her family's power out. And no one in her family had the ability, wherewithal, or even the desire to reel her in. Yeah. If they were really very concerned about her, they could have taken her out to the plantation and made her stay there. Because there was no way for her to get around. She's not going to walk.
Yeah.
And
There's
we will be
actual letters back and forth between her children and her to France where they're saying, just don't come home, just stay there.
Yeah, because like I said, all the kids, except for the youngest one, made good marriages and became successful and tried to put all that behind them.
Some well-known New Orleans families that you will recognize.
Very well-known New Orleans families who...
Are any particularly interesting families that are the descendants of some of the LaLaurie clan?
There's the Forstall family, De La Souza family, a few like that. Do you know any other family names?
The Forstalls are the biggest ones, yeah. And Delphine, we even know where her body is.
Wow.
Yes.
Is it in New Orleans or is
Yes,
it
it is. The legend goes is that back in France, she's on a hunting party with some friends. She got separated from the group, gets off her horse, and is attacked and eaten alive by wild boars, which it makes a nice karmic ending to the story. We don't know why she died, probably natural causes. She was an elderly woman and such. But her remains were brought back to New Orleans. Carolyn Morrow Long, the book Madame LaLaurie, she's a Smithsonian researcher. I'm going to go with the Smithsonian researcher.
Yeah.
And she has had documentation of Delphine's body, first interned at Père Lachaise, and they removed her body, and it was shipped back to New Orleans. All the records bring it all the way to the docks of the French Quarter. The record stopped there. She did not have a family tomb. Okay, there was no LaLaurie tomb because she had left and she's had different husbands and whatnot. She didn't go into a McCarty tomb, but she only had one son, John Blanc Jr.
Yeah, the second.
And he had a family tomb in the St. Louis cemetery at the time that her body was brought back here. It makes the most sense that she would have been put in her son's tomb and not in a daughter's tomb, because all her daughters were in the tombs of their husbands and those families.
Right.
We did find a granddaughter in the St. Louis number 1, but she's in the St. Louis number 1. It's a tomb when you go in the front gate, and a little bit, Marie Laveau's tomb is off to the left side. You go straight a little bit, maybe about 20, 30 feet, and at the water spigot, you make a right-hand turn. 2 tombs in, it has, 6 chambers?
6 chambers.
And it has an iron gate, but there is no placard, no sign, no one's names are engraved. There's no name on the tomb itself. Just nondescript, plain, 6 chambers, but that's where she is.
All right, so for anyone visiting New Orleans, you can come visit the grave, and I think we have closed the casket on this case. And for next episode, we will also be talking about devious women and bad relationships. All right, and we will cut this episode, Will. All right.
Awesome.
So, as we found out, did Madame LaLaurie flee to Paris successfully? Did she settle in Mobile and never stepped out in public again? Was she killed for her crimes against humanity? The paper trail on Madame LaLaurie can run short, but the stories surrounding her are plentiful. What is the distinction between a legendary monster and a larger-than-life villain? Is there a difference, or do we create our own monsters? Stay tuned and sleep with one eye open tonight.
Dancing in the moonlight on a bright night, a summer night in June, where doggies all are humming and strumming banjos to that Dixie tune, and soon you'll find them dancing.